My parents excluded me from vacation and wanted my $6.8 million beach house. Envelope I sent made them scream. It was supposed to be a family trip, the kind they always bragged about on Facebook. A sprawling rental down in the Outer Banks, everyone together, like the old days. Except for me. They'd booked it, paid the deposit, and then casually mentioned over a strained Sunday dinner that, well, it was a bit of a squeeze this year, and maybe I'd be better off with my own little break. My parents, David and Eleanor Sterling, lords of their suburban kingdom built on inherited wealth and a relentless pursuit of appearances, had somehow decided my presence was inconvenient for their curated family portrait. I'm their only daughter, Sarah. For years, I'd been the golden child, the one who charmed them, the one who played by their rules, or so I thought. The beach house, though, that was mine. Bought with my own sweat and a hefty dose of luck in the tech boom, a place where I could escape the stifling expectations, the constant, subtly coded critiques of my life choices. It was a beautiful, cedar-shingled sanctuary perched on the dunes, overlooking miles of Atlantic coast, a place I poured my heart and soul into decorating, making it utterly my own. When they told me about the vacation, it was delivered with that saccharine sweetness that always felt like a lie. "Oh, Sarah, darling," Mom had said, her voice dripping with faux concern, "we just want you to have a relaxing time. You work so hard. We thought maybe you could just stay at your place, recharge." Dad, beside her, gave a curt nod, his eyes, the same steely blue as mine, a little too fixed on the roast chicken. It felt less like a suggestion and more like an eviction notice. My own family, the people who were supposed to be my bedrock, were suddenly treating me like a guest who'd overstayed their welcome. The money, the $6.8 million I'd sunk into that beach house, was a constant, unspoken presence in their minds. They'd always eyed it, commenting on its value, the potential for family gatherings, the way it reflected well on their family name. It was never just about my enjoyment, it was about their prestige. I remember the first time they really brought it up, after I'd bought it. We were at their annual summer party, the one where all their old money friends mingled with the newly minted ones, a parade of perfect smiles and forced laughter. Eleanor had steered me towards a group of her bridge partners, nudging my arm. "Sarah's just bought herself a little something down in the Outer Banks," she announced, her voice a little too loud. "A fixer-upper, but she has such a good eye. She's going to turn it into a real gem. Such an investment." The emphasis on investment hung in the air, a subtle signal that this was not just my personal haven, but a tangible asset that could, perhaps, one day be leveraged for the family's benefit. It was always about what I could do for them, even when it was presented as a compliment. The exclusion from the vacation was the culmination of 1,000 time cuts, the veiled criticisms of my career choices, the subtle disapproval of my single status, the constant comparisons to my cousins who were already married with children and climbing the corporate ladder their way. They wanted me to fit their mold, to be the perfect Sterling daughter, and when I didn't quite manage it, they decided to simply sideline me. I tried to push back, gently at first.
"But Mom, I thought we were all going. I was looking forward to it." Her smile tightened. "Darling, you know how tight the space is, and honestly, with the kids, it's better if it's just the immediate family this year. You'll understand when you're a mother." The implication was clear. Until I replicated their life path, I was less than, less important, less deserving. I didn't have kids. I was focused on my career. I lived a life that, while successful and fulfilling to me, deviated from their rigid, traditional blueprint. And for that, I was being punished. The beach house, my sanctuary, suddenly felt like a target. I knew, with a chilling certainty, that they weren't just talking about a summer vacation. This was a test, a power play. They wanted to see how easily they could make me disappear from their perfect family narrative, and by extension, how easily they could exert influence over my most prized possession. The silence that followed their pronouncement was heavy, laced with unspoken accusations and my own simmering resentment. I just nodded, a tight knot forming in my stomach. "Okay," I managed, the word tasting like ash. I excused myself, needing air. The sprawling lawn of their meticulously manicured estate felt suffocating. The air, usually so fresh and clean, seemed thick with disapproval. I walked to the edge of the property, where the manicured hedges gave way to a small, untamed patch of woods that bordered their land. It was my childhood haunt, a place where I used to escape their suffocating perfection as a kid. Now it felt like a fitting metaphor for my current position in their lives, on the fringe, slightly wild and inconveniently separate. I sat on a moss-covered fallen log, the rough bark digging into my legs through my dress. The chirping of crickets and the rustle of leaves were a stark contrast to the polished hum of the dinner party happening inside. Inside that house, My parents and my brother, Michael, were likely discussing the logistics of their vacation, the one I was excluded from. Michael, he was their golden boy, the one who had followed their script perfectly. Married, 2 kids, a respectable law firm. He never questioned them. He never pushed back. He was the son they always wanted. And he was always so quick to agree with them, to subtly reinforce their opinions about me. I could already hear his voice, smooth and reasonable. "Mom's right, Sarah. It'll be a nice break for you. You can finally finish that renovation project on your place." The renovation project. Another subtle jab. It was nearly done, actually. I'd been pouring weekends and evenings into it, enjoying the process. It was my escape, my creative outlet, and they saw it as something I was failing to complete, a reflection of my supposed lack of focus. The humiliation wasn't just in being excluded from the vacation. It was in the way they framed it, the way they made it sound like a kindness, a considerate gesture. It was the subtle erasure of my place in their lives, a quiet dismissal of my worth. I thought about the beach house. The mortgage was paid off. The renovations were almost complete. It was my financial freedom, my independence. It was the one thing I had built entirely on my own, without their help or their interference. And I knew with a gnawing certainty that it was precisely this independence that they resented. It made me less controllable. It made me less reliant on their approval. They liked me better when I was a project, when I needed their guidance, their validation. The beach house was a symbol of me not needing them, and that, I realized, was the real crime. I stood up, brushing leaves from my dress. The woods suddenly felt less like an escape and more like a place to strategize. My initial reaction had been hurt, confusion, a pathetic sense of being unwanted. But as I stood there, the cool evening air on my face, a different feeling began to take root. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was a cold, hard clarity. They wanted my beach house. They wanted to control my life. They wanted me to disappear. And they thought I would just roll over. They had underestimated me, severely. I walked back towards the house, my steps purposeful. The polite facade I usually maintained was cracking, revealing something harder underneath. I needed to get home. I needed to think. The drive back to my apartment in the city was long and solitary, but my mind was anything but quiet. Every barbed comment, every dismissive glance, every subtle manipulation flashed through my mind. They had always held the purse strings in the family, doling out allowances and loans that came with strings attached. Even now, well into my 30s, they still found ways to remind me of their financial power, their influence. "We're so proud of what you've achieved, Sarah," Eleanor would say, her voice laced with a proprietary tone, "especially considering you didn't have the benefit of our connections to get you started." It was a backhanded compliment, a constant reminder that my success was somehow less legitimate because it wasn't directly facilitated by them. The beach house was different. It was mine, unequivocally mine. I'd worked for it, saved for it, made smart decisions for it. It represented a level of autonomy they couldn't touch, or so I'd believed. Their casual exclusion from the vacation, their thinly veiled desire for my property, it all pointed to a shift. They weren't just subtly influencing me anymore. They were actively trying to take something from me. And the thought of them, my parents, my brother, all of them, vacationing in my sanctuary, making decisions about my house, felt like a violation. I arrived home, the city lights a blurry backdrop to my churning thoughts. I went straight to my study, the room where I did most of my work, the room that felt most like me. The envelope, that was the missing piece. They'd sent me something I'd almost forgotten about in the chaos of the dinner and the subsequent drive. It was a small, cream-colored envelope, tucked into my coat pocket by my mother as I was leaving, a final, seemingly innocuous gesture. "Just a little something for you, darling," she'd said, her lips barely touching my cheek, "to help with those little expenses." I'd shoved it into my pocket, too caught up in the emotional fallout of the vacation news to even glance at it. Now I dug it out. It was thicker than a standard letter. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. Inside, there wasn't a card or a sweet note. There were several crisp folded sheets of paper. They looked like legal documents. My heart began to pound. I unfolded the first sheet. It was a letter, typed on official-looking letterhead. The law firm name was familiar, a prestigious firm downtown that my father often used. My stomach lurched. I started reading. The words swam before my eyes at first, then sharpened into terrifying focus.
It was a formal notification, a meticulously worded legal disclaimer. It stated that in accordance with their updated estate planning directives and recognizing my distinct financial independence and self-sufficiency, they, David and Eleanor Sterling, were formally withdrawing their offer of future financial support and assistance. It went on to detail how, due to this withdrawal, and in order to rectify potential imbalances within the family inheritance structure, they were initiating a process to consolidate certain family assets. My breath hitched. I scanned further down the page, my eyes darting to specific phrases. Transfer of equitable title, nominal repurchase agreement, beachfront property located at my beach house address. They were talking about the beach house. They were talking about taking it. Not loaning it, not using it, but taking it. The legal jargon was dense, but the implication was sickeningly clear. They had drawn up legal documents, consulted lawyers, all behind my back to initiate a process that would transfer ownership of my beach house to them. The nominal repurchase agreement was a cruel joke, a way to pretend they weren't simply seizing my property. The letter was dated 2 weeks prior. They had been planning this for a while. This wasn't about a vacation. This was about control. This was about leverage. This was about taking the one thing that represented my true independence, my escape, my hard-won security. The sheer audacity, the calculated betrayal was staggering. They had invited me to dinner, feigned concern about my relaxing break, all while simultaneously filing legal paperwork to strip me of my most valuable asset. I unfolded the next document. It was a draft deed of trust, outlining a convoluted financial arrangement that would effectively cede control of the beach house to them, with vague promises of me being able to utilize it at their discretion. The third document was a power of attorney, granting them broad authority to act on my behalf in any matters related to the property. It was all there, laid out in cold legal terms. My parents, who had always presented themselves as loving and supportive, were orchestrating a hostile takeover of my own home. The hurt was a physical blow, knocking the air out of my lungs. But beneath it, something else was stirring, a quiet, dangerous resolve. They thought they could pull this off, that I would be too shocked, too hurt, too stupid to fight back. They underestimated my intelligence. They underestimated my will. They underestimated my capacity for something much darker. They wanted my beach house. They thought they could just take it. They were about to learn a very, very hard lesson. The pristine, cream-colored envelope, once a symbol of a seemingly thoughtful gesture, now felt like a weapon they had carelessly handed to me. They had made their move. Now it was my turn. I looked at the documents, the cold legal language, a stark contrast to the fiery emotion coursing through me. I had to be smart. I had to be strategic. Humiliation was a powerful motivator, but a well-executed plan, that was something else entirely. I took a deep, shuddering breath. This was no longer about family vacations or polite dinners. This was war, and they had just declared it. The air in my study felt suddenly charged, thick with the scent of old paper and impending storm.
The documents lay spread out before me, stark white against the dark mahogany of my desk, each one a testament to a betrayal so profound it felt like a physical amputation. The legal terms, so precise and clinical, couldn't mask the raw, greedy intent behind them. My parents, David and Eleanor Sterling. They hadn't just excluded me from their precious vacation, they had been systematically working to seize my beach house. The sheer audacity of it all, the calculated deception, was breathtaking. They'd spent years dangling financial lifelines, veiled criticisms, and carefully crafted expectations, all to keep me tethered to their approval, to their vision of what a Sterling daughter should be. But the beach house, that was my anchor to myself, my declaration of independence. And they, in their infinite wisdom, had decided it was an asset to be reclaimed, a testament to their supposed authority, rather than a symbol of my own hard-won autonomy. I picked up the phone, my fingers automatically dialing my lawyer's number, Arthur Finch. He was one of the few people I trusted implicitly, a man whose calm demeanor and razor-sharp legal mind had saved me from more than one sticky situation my parents had indirectly created. He answered on the third ring, his voice a low, steady rumble. "Sarah, everything all right?" "Arthur," I began, my voice surprisingly steady, a chill settling deep in my bones. "It's not all right. I just received some documents from my parents, legal documents." I explained the situation, relaying the contents of the letter and the accompanying drafts. As I spoke, I could hear the subtle shift in his tone, from professional courtesy to focused intensity. He listened without interruption, the occasional grunt of acknowledgement the only sign he was processing the enormity of it. "Sent to you by certified mail, I assume?" he finally asked, his voice now grave. "No, just in an envelope they gave me as I was leaving. A little something for you," my mother said. A beat of silence. "That complicates things, but doesn't negate them. These documents, Sarah, they're initiating a legal process, a unilateral one from the looks of it. They're trying to take my house, Arthur, my beach house, the one I paid for entirely on my own." The anger, which had been a cold ember, began to flare. "I understand, and they have absolutely no legal standing to do so, not without your consent. Not unless there's some hidden clause in a trust or a prior agreement you've forgotten about. There isn't. I've been meticulous. It's solely in my name. Paid off. No shared ownership. Nothing. Good. That's very good. These drafts, they're essentially an attempt to force your hand, to scare you into compliance. The power of attorney, the deed of trust, these are strong-arm tactics. They've clearly consulted with counsel, and they're using legal threats to achieve what they can't through familial persuasion." He paused. "Sarah, this is aggressive, even for them. What was the stated reason for the vacation exclusion?" "They said it was too crowded, and they wanted me to have a relaxing time at my own place. My mother said I'd understand when I was a mother myself." The mockery in my voice was barely contained. Arthur sighed, a sound of weary resignation. "The subtext, of course, is that your lifestyle is inconvenient, and the house is a valuable asset they believe they have a right to control."
They probably see it as a sterling inheritance that you somehow misappropriated by living your own life in it. They want to control everything, Arthur, and they think they can. They think I'll just crumble. They've underestimated me. Badly. It appears so. Now listen carefully. Do not contact them. Do not respond to any further communication from them directly. Forward everything to me. All calls, all letters, all emails. I will handle it. These documents as drafts are not legally binding. They are a warning, a very loud, very unpleasant warning. But we have time, and we have the law on our side. They've made their move, Sarah. Now we make ours. The conversation with Arthur was a lifeline, a solid hand reaching out in a swirling current of deceit. But it didn't erase the sting of their actions. The image of my parents, my own flesh and blood, meticulously planning to strip me of my most cherished possession, burned behind my eyelids. The humiliation of being excluded was nothing compared to the cold, hard realization of their avarice. Over the next few days, I threw myself into my work, the sterile efficiency of my urban office a welcome counterpoint to the emotional turmoil brewing within me. I needed a plan, a meticulous, irrefutable plan. I reread the documents Arthur had kept for his records, absorbing every word, every legal loophole, every potential avenue of attack. My parents believed they held all the cards, their inherited wealth and social standing a formidable shield, but they had overlooked one crucial element: my intelligence, my drive, and my deep, burning desire to reclaim what was mine, not just my house, but my sense of self-worth, which they had spent a lifetime chipping away at. I started digging. Not through public records. Arthur had that covered. I dug into my family's history, into the complex web of trusts and financial dealings my father had managed for decades. My father, David Sterling, was a master manipulator of money, a man who could make wealth appear and disappear with a stroke of his pen. He prided himself on his financial acumen, his ability to orchestrate fortunes for the family. But I suspected there were layers to his empire that even he didn't fully disclose, especially to his children. He was a man who enjoyed control, and the idea of me, his daughter, thriving independently, owning a property worth millions that he hadn't directly facilitated, must have been a constant irritant. I remembered hushed conversations I'd overheard at family gatherings, whispers about holding companies and offshore accounts. My father had always been vague about the specifics, deflecting questions with a wave of his hand and a dismissive, "It's all taken care of, Sarah." Taken care of for whom and how? I began subtly probing my uncle, my father's younger brother, Robert. Robert was more laid back, less consumed by the sterling facade, and I suspected had always been slightly resentful of David's dominance. We met for coffee, a neutral ground, away from the watchful eyes of Eleanor and David. I kept the conversation light, talking about my life, my work, then casually steering it towards family finances. "Uncle Robert," I began, stirring my latte, "you know how Dad always talks about his investments. I've always been a bit curious. He's always managed things so privately." Robert chuckled, a dry, knowing sound. "David? Private is his middle name. He likes to keep his cards close to his chest. Always has. It's just, with the beach house and everything, I've been thinking more about financial security. about how things are structured. Has he ever mentioned, say, setting up anything specifically for us? Beyond the basic trust fund, of course, which is, well, it's not exactly going to buy me a beach house. I offered a wry smile, hoping to elicit a similar candor from him. He took a long sip of his coffee, his eyes narrowing slightly, a flicker of something I couldn't quite decipher crossing his face. Well, Sarah, David's a complex man. He's always been meticulous about his legacy. He believes in keeping control centralized, especially with assets that reflect well on the family name, like your beach house. The mention of my house, unsolicited, sent a fresh jolt through me. He mentioned the beach house in his letter, I said, keeping my tone neutral, almost surprised. Robert's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. Oh, did he? Well, that's interesting. Because you see, Sarah, what most people don't realize, what David certainly doesn't advertise, is that he's been funneling a significant portion of his wealth into a sort of holding company. A shell, really, but one with substantial assets behind it. He calls it Sterling Holdings Group. It's designed to maintain control over key family assets, even if they're technically in someone else's name. He's always been obsessed with ensuring that nothing truly valuable escapes his sphere of influence. Your house, it falls under that umbrella in his mind. He probably set up the legal framework years ago, anticipating situations like this, or perhaps anticipating a situation where he'd want to exert control for his own reasons. My heart hammered against my ribs. A shell company, a holding group designed to control assets, even if they're technically in someone else's name. This was it. This was the hidden layer, the secret architecture of his control. He hadn't just been trying to scare me. He'd been building a cage, and I, in my blissful ignorance, had walked right into it. The nominal repurchase agreement wasn't a joke. It was a legal fig leaf designed to mask a transfer of ownership orchestrated through this clandestine entity. Sterling Holdings Group, I repeated, tasting the words. And he controls it? Absolutely. Completely. He's the sole director, the sole shareholder. He set it up as a private trust, with himself as the ultimate beneficiary and executor. It's his way of ensuring that his vision for the family's wealth is preserved, no matter what. He probably sees it as a safeguard. I see it as another way for him to exert power. So when he talks about consolidating family assets, he means assets under Sterling Holdings Group, which he then uses to claim ownership of things like my house. Precisely. He's essentially using his own entity, which he secretly controls, to initiate a transfer of title. It's legally complex, of course, and highly unethical. Arthur will be able to fight it, I'm sure. But it's the method he's using that's so typical of him. He leaves nothing to chance, and he certainly doesn't leave anything out of his grasp. He probably thinks he'll be too overwhelmed by the legal jargon, too intimidated by his resources to resist. He's been grooming you for obedience for years, Sarah.
And when you started to deviate, he found a way to rein you back in. The conversation with Robert was a revelation, a chilling confirmation of my father's Machiavellian nature. It wasn't just greed. It was a profound need for absolute control, a desire to own not just things, but people, their choices, their very essence. He saw my independence as a rebellion, and he was prepared to use every legal and financial weapon at his disposal to quash it. The humiliation of the vacation exclusion was now dwarfed by the stark reality of his systematic dismantling of my autonomy. I left the coffee shop with a new resolve hardening within me. It wasn't just about my beach house anymore. It was about exposing the intricate web of deceit my father had woven, about dismantling Sterling Holdings Group, and about ensuring he could never pull this stunt on anyone again. Arthur had the legal strategy, but I had the motivation, and now I had the knowledge. I began to systematically gather information. I asked Arthur to initiate a forensic accounting of Sterling Holdings Group, to trace its origins, its assets, its beneficiaries. I also started researching shell companies, offshore trusts, and the legal ramifications of fraudulent asset transfers. I spent late nights poring over legal texts, becoming an amateur expert in my father's own game. The tension in our infrequent, stilted phone calls with my parents was palpable. Eleanor would ask in a saccharine tone, "And how is your beautiful beach house, darling? Getting much use?" Each question felt like a prod, a test of my resolve. I responded with polite, non-committal answers, my mind already several steps ahead. One evening, I received a call from my father. His voice, usually so smooth and reassuring, was tight with an undercurrent of impatience. "Sarah, we received word from our counsel that you've engaged legal representation regarding the property. This is highly irregular and frankly unnecessary. We're simply trying to ensure a fair distribution of family assets.
You are being overly sensitive. Your mother and I are willing to discuss a reasonable arrangement, but this legal maneuvering is frankly disrespectful." "Disrespectful," I echoed, my voice dangerously low. "You sent me legal documents attempting to seize my property, and I'm being disrespectful for seeking legal counsel?" "Those were merely preliminary notices, Sarah, to inform you of our intentions. We assumed you would be reasonable. This belligerence is not what we raised you to be. You raised me to be independent, father, to be intelligent, to be strong, and I am. You've underestimated me. You've underestimated my ability to understand what you're doing. This isn't about a fair distribution. This is about you trying to control me, to take what's mine, because you can't stand the idea of me being truly free of your influence." There was a stunned silence on his end. He wasn't accustomed to being challenged so directly, so knowledgeably. He clearly hadn't anticipated me digging into the intricacies of Sterling Holdings Group. "You don't understand the complexities of estate planning, Sarah," he finally managed, his voice regaining a sliver of his patronizing tone. "Sterling Holdings Group is a family safeguard. It's for the long-term benefit of the Sterling legacy. Your legacy, father, not mine. And I have my own legacy to build, one that doesn't involve you dictating terms from the shadows. I have Arthur."
And Arthur assures me that your family safeguard is in fact a thinly veiled attempt at asset theft. So no, I won't be discussing any reasonable arrangements. I'll be fighting this every step of the way. I hung up before he could respond, a grim satisfaction settling over me. I could hear the tremor in his voice, the flicker of surprise and perhaps even fear. He had expected me to cower, to negotiate from a position of weakness. Instead, I had met him on his own turf, armed with knowledge and a steely resolve he'd never thought I possessed. The next day, Arthur called, his voice charged with an excitement that mirrored my own. "Sarah, I've got it. Sterling Holdings Group. It's exactly what Robert suggested, a labyrinth of trusts and holding entities designed to obscure ownership and maintain control. But it's riddled with irregularities. The way he structured certain transfers, the lack of proper documentation for some of the asset acquisitions, it's not just aggressive, it's potentially fraudulent. He's been using the group to essentially reacquire assets he technically gifted or sold years ago, all while maintaining the facade of a legitimate transaction. Your beach house is just the latest example. He's essentially trying to retroactively claim ownership through this entity. So what does that mean for my house? It means we have grounds to challenge the validity of his claims. We can argue that Sterling Holdings Group, as he's used it, constitutes a fraudulent scheme to defraud you of your property. We can argue that the transfer process he initiated is voidable. It's a complex legal battle, Sarah, and it will be expensive, but we have a very strong case. A wave of relief washed over me, quickly followed by a surge of adrenaline. This was it, the turning point. They had underestimated me, and now they were about to face the consequences. I looked at the documents again, no longer just symbols of betrayal, but blueprints for my victory. The game was far from over, but the board had shifted, and the player they thought they could easily dismiss was now poised to deliver a decisive checkmate. The thought of their shock, their disbelief, as their meticulously constructed empire began to crumble around them, it was a powerful motivator. They wanted my house. They were about to find out that their ambition had opened a Pandora's box of their own making, and the ultimate price of their greed would be far greater than they could ever have imagined. The quiet hum of my apartment was a stark contrast to the battlefield I now inhabited. The days bled into weeks, each one a calculated step deeper into the legal quagmire my father had so artfully constructed. Arthur was a maestro, conducting a symphony of motions and countermotions, his every move precise, devastating. He unearthed more. The Sterling Holdings Group wasn't just a tool for control, it was a monument to my father's paranoia, a black hole of undeclared income and meticulously laundered assets. He'd always bragged about his financial genius, his ability to make money work for him. Turns out he'd also made it work against him, or rather, against anyone who dared to step outside his rigid framework. The paperwork he'd sent me wasn't just a draft. It was an admission of his methods, a blueprint of his deception, now laid bare for the world to see. My parents, oblivious to the storm-gathering force, continued their charade.
Eleanor's phone calls became more frequent, laced with an increasingly desperate sweetness. "Darling, are you sure you're not lonely out there? Perhaps a visit from us would cheer you up. We miss our little girl." Each call was a fresh wave of nausea, a reminder of the venom hidden beneath the syrupy veneer. I'd perfected the art of the placid response, the vague reassurance,
while internally I was orchestrating their downfall. David, meanwhile, remained mostly silent, his pride likely bruised by my refusal to be bullied into submission. I imagined him seething, pacing his study, unable to fathom how his carefully cultivated daughter had managed to slip through his fingers. The first real crack appeared when Arthur served Sterling Holdings Group with a subpoena, demanding a full audit. The legal world in our circles was a small one, and word travels fast. My Uncle Robert, bless his complicit heart, heard through the grapevine and called me, his voice a mixture of concern and awe. "Sarah, I didn't realize David had gone this far. This is serious. He's exposing himself. Sterling Holdings, it's not just about control. It's about obscuring a lot of things he wouldn't want you to know." "Like what, Uncle Robert?" I asked, my voice low, steady. I knew he knew more than he was letting on. He'd always been on the periphery of David's machinations, a reluctant observer. He hesitated. "Like some of the initial capital, where it came from. It wasn't all clean, Sarah. He built his empire on aggressive strategies, and Sterling Holdings was his way of burying the evidence. If Arthur starts digging deep enough, he might find things that could damage David's reputation severely." This was it, the leverage I hadn't even known I possessed. My father's meticulously crafted image as a pillar of the community, a shrewd but ethical businessman, was built on a foundation of sand, and Sterling Holdings Group was the tide that was about to wash it all away. The next few weeks were a blur of intense legal strategy. Arthur and his team worked around the clock, their focus unwavering. They found discrepancies, shell corporations within shell corporations, and a trail of money that led to places I couldn't have imagined. My father, it turned out, had a flair for the dramatic, a penchant for secrecy that bordered on the pathological. He'd created an elaborate financial fortress, believing it impenetrable. He'd forgotten one thing, that even fortresses have vulnerabilities, and sometimes the most dangerous enemies are the ones hiding in plain sight. The turning point came during a family holiday gathering, Thanksgiving. The Sterlings always threw the most ostentatious party in town. Chandeliers sparkled, champagne flowed, and the air buzzed with forced bonhomie. I had debated not going, but a primal need to see their faces, to witness the moment their world imploded, compelled me. I walked in alone, dressed in a simple but elegant black dress, a stark contrast to the opulent silk and velvet adorning my mother and her sycophanted guests. Eleanor spotted me, and her smile froze, her eyes narrowing. David, across the room, stiffened, his jaw tightening. The usual air of effortless superiority around them was gone, replaced by a subtle tension, a frantic awareness that something was amiss. My Aunt Carol, David's sister-in-law, a woman known for her sharp tongue and even sharper observations, approached me. "Sarah, darling,
We haven't seen you in ages. David said you were indisposed, having some trouble with your beach house, I heard." Her voice dripped with insinuation. I met her gaze, a faint smile playing on my lips. "Oh, the beach house is fine, Aunt Carol. In fact, it's quite secure. Far more secure than some people might wish." Before she could retort, David materialized beside Eleanor, his smile tight, forced. "Sarah, we weren't expecting you. We assumed you'd be occupied? Occupied with sorting out the legal ramifications of your creative accounting, father?" I said, my voice carried just loud enough to draw a few curious glances. Eleanor visibly flinched. David's eyes flashed with a cold fury. "That's a rather unfounded accusation, Sarah. We are merely seeking to clarify certain matters of inheritance." "Clarifying or confiscating?" I countered, my voice still calm but with an edge of steel. "Because Arthur Finch seems to be uncovering a rather extensive pattern of asset manipulation through Sterling Holdings Group, a pattern that suggests the clarification involves you attempting to seize assets that are legally mine." The room had gone unnervingly quiet. All conversations had ceased. Faces turned towards us, a mixture of shock and morbid curiosity. My mother's hand flew to her throat, her perfectly sculpted composure cracking. You wouldn't," David stammered, his voice losing his practiced authority. "Arthur Finch, he knows nothing of the true nature of Sterling Holdings. It's a complex family trust for the preservation of our legacy. A trust that seems to have conveniently acquired assets for you, Father, while conveniently erasing the legal ownership of others, I said, stepping closer. The air crackled with unspoken accusations. You've been using it to shuffle assets, to hide income, to essentially claim ownership of things you've already given away. And the preliminary findings from the forensic audit suggest, well, they suggest that your legacy might be built on a rather shaky foundation, a foundation that could crumble under scrutiny. David's face was a mask of disbelief, then a flush of impotent rage. This is slander, Sarah. You have no proof. Oh, but I do, Father, I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper, but resonating with a chilling finality. Arthur has it all. The offshore accounts, the shell corporations, the undeclared income, the way you've been systematically trying to reclaim properties under the guise of asset consolidation. It's all there. And frankly, the implications for tax evasion alone are significant, not to mention the charges of fraud you could face for attempting to unlawfully seize my property through a fraudulent entity. Eleanor let out a small, strangled gasp. Her carefully constructed world, the one built on wealth and social standing, was shattering around her. She looked at David, her eyes wide with a dawning horror, as if seeing him for the first time, not as the patriarch, but as the man who had built their fortune on such precarious, potentially illegal ground. David's jaw worked, but no sound came out. He looked utterly defeated, his carefully constructed facade crumbling into dust. The man who had always presented himself as untouchable, as the ultimate arbiter of the Sterling destiny, was now exposed as a man who had played too fast and too loose with the law, and who had underestimated his own daughter. You think you can just take what's mine?
He finally rasped, his voice hoarse. After everything I've done for this family? Everything you've done? I repeated, my voice laced with a cold, quiet fury. Or everything you've done to control us, to mold us into your perfect little Sterling images. My beach house was my escape, Father, my declaration that I could build something for myself, away from your suffocating influence. And you couldn't stand it. You couldn't stand the thought of me having something that wasn't dictated by you, funded by you, or controlled by you. I took a deep breath, the applause from the stunned guests almost imperceptible beneath the pounding in my ears. Sterling Holdings Group was your masterpiece of control, wasn't it? Your way of ensuring that no matter what, you still held the strings. But you made one critical mistake. You underestimated my resolve. You underestimated my intelligence. And you underestimated the power of truth. Arthur is currently filing the necessary motions to have Sterling Holdings dissolved and the fraudulent transfers voided. Your legacy, Father, is about to be dismantled piece by piece, not by me, but by the very system you tried to manipulate. The silence that followed was profound, a heavy blanket of shock and dawning realization. Eleanor began to sob, quiet, choked sounds that spoke of a lifetime of carefully curated illusions being ripped apart. David stood frozen, his face pale, his eyes fixed on some unseen point in the distance, the weight of his own actions crushing him. The opulent party, once a symbol of Sterling wealth and power, had become a stage for their humiliation. I turned and walked away from them, away from the wreckage of their carefully constructed lives. I didn't need to say another word. The legal documents, the looming investigations, the shattered looks on their faces, they were all the confession I needed. As I stepped out into the crisp night air, the weight that had been pressing down on me for years began to lift. It wasn't just the beach house I had reclaimed. It was my freedom, my autonomy, my very sense of self. The road ahead would undoubtedly have its challenges, but for the first time in a long time, I felt truly, completely, and victoriously free. The control was mine now. It had always been mine, waiting to be unearthed from the shadows of their deceit. And the quiet hum of my life, now restored, sounded like the sweetest victory song.